when you are starting up a project, as I said, whether it's community-based or not, one of the first things you do is, the things we went over in those first 3 classes. You're getting to know the client, you get the lay of the land, you look at scheduling, budget, you understand all the players involved. And tonight we wanted to specifically focus on what happens when you get that first set of civil drawings. And we're going to talk a little bit about the role of the surveyor, about elevations, what's on the survey, identifying the corners, out in the field there, and then the general notes that appear. I've got on this PowerPoint here, it says the role of the surveyor, and then it says signed, and general notes and overall site plan says signed. We talked about this in the beginning, that when you take on a job, make sure that whether it's the survey, the architect's, design, the engineers, whoever it is, that they've actually put their signature and the date on the set that you are using. We also will focus on grading and what to do with what are called spoils, which is, really the, oftentimes, I don't like to use that terminology, but that's common in the field, but oftentimes that's topsoil. That is considered spoils. Sometimes, it's the clay silt that you dig up. And then the connection to the SWIP, the Stormwater Pollution Prevention Plan. And all these things are really tied in with that. We're going to go through a little bit about stormwater retention, the role of capturing rainwater, the role of the impervious surface, and again, just, guiding stormwater, when you have to leave it on the site, when you can actually allow it to leave the site and go into, so-called waters of the state. We'll talk about the electricity, fiber, sewer, and water, and the role of the CECL. Some of you may already be a certified erosion and sediment control lead. Sorry about that. But at any rate, we'll talk about that and the significance of having somebody. I think it's always important to have your own CECL. You don't need to, but it's fairly easy course to go through. And once you get the hang of it, you get recertified every second year. Doesn't cost too much. And it's can be really helpful from start to finish if you've got your own CECL there. Since we're dealing with community projects, I thought I would, and one of the things we talked about here was progressive community development. So, this is say a 7-acre site, and it's developed in, maybe 5, 6, 7, 8 passes because you don't have enough money to do it all at once, because if you think about it, to develop a single house on a piece of property, you're going to spend about between $70,000 and $100,000 just on infrastructure, getting your stormwater and driveway and all your utilities and rainwater and all of that set up. So if you multiply that towards numerous houses, you can see how quickly, typically a nonprofit, wouldn't have access to that kind of funding. And if they do, more power to them, for being able to do it all at once. But at any rate, regardless of whether you've got the money, if you have a site where there's going to be a lot of development on it, you create your master plan first. And then from your master plan, right, you begin to, figure out how you're going to develop the site that makes the most sense for you. I put this up here because, it's showing the elevations, it's showing where some of the buildings are going, and you can see it quickly becomes, what some consider sort of a chaotic mess, really. Here it is again, just a little bit. You can see some of the things where, regardless of what you're developing, you want to create your stormwater pond, probably one of the first things you do. And you'll want your engineer to size it accordingly for build out, right? Because you don't want to have to come in each time and expand something as major expense and land wise as a stormwater pond. Typically, when you're doing stormwater controls, the regulations say that you have to really keep all that water on your site. You cannot just pass it on to your neighbors. But of course, the grounds here become saturated and water is going to flow. And on something like this, you would install a level spreader. And as this stormwater pond fills up, that level spreader would just start releasing water across quite, a length of the pond, and behave more like a natural environment, as opposed to gushing out onto the neighbor's property. And then from there, it flows, well, hopefully it's recharging along the way and then eventually flowing out into the bay. Again, I just wanted to show you this because you'll see these elevations here. When you do a property, right, the surveyors are going to go out and they're actually going to, they'll do their elevations here and put some hubs in, right? You can see where they've got some hubs along the way. And those are elevations, and then they start to just carry them out. But when you say are at a building like this, and you can see the elevation here is at 81 here, and then at 80, and then here's a hub here at 78. So you've almost got, almost 2 feet of drop there. So sometimes what you'll do is you'll invite your surveyor back after they do the entire site and have them actually do, mark the corners of your building site and get you some finer elevations closer together so that you are, you can prepare a little bit, because concrete is expensive, more expensive than a surveyor. And so if you've got to have, a 4-foot wall in one section, whereas if you adjusted your house or your foundation a little bit, you could get by with, 2 feet coming out of the ground, you'd want to do that. So again, you go from the kind of the, 100-foot level looking down, and then you get deeper and deeper into it and make adjustments along the way. You always want to remember that, everything you do on paper, it is the cheapest time to make changes. It is the best time to look at all the details. It is also the best time to ask your designer, your surveyor, your civil folks, anybody else, a lot of questions of anything that you notice, because this is where you want to make all of the changes. Once you bring heavy equipment out onto the site, it is, a lot of money really fast. And so you don't want to have to do stop and start or back up once you get going.
Sally,
Yeah,
Sandy, can I just throw in a little bit about, explain a little bit about progressive community development, what kind of
yeah,
what that means. You know, traditional community development, you know, it's kind of a lot of paving, cul-de-sac roads. Everyone has a garage and a front yard and a backyard, and you know, that's the way it's always been done. But the affordable housing communities we've been building in San Juan County have been more focused on things like remote parking, trying to get the cars kind of off away from houses a bit, try to cluster houses enough so that you can create common space, kind of place for kids to play, in a place where everyone can see them. So yeah, just kind of a different approach in terms of how to fit as many houses as possible on a lot. Try to make parking and access as efficient as possible, and just, you know, attempts to try and create community by having homeowners be a little more interactive than the traditional view of community development.
yeah. Thank you, Pete. Yeah. Yeah, and you will, yeah, you'll see examples of that pretty much all over the islands. You know, when, and that's done for several reasons, right? You want a lot of buy-in when you're doing community-based housing, because after all, you know, you're the organization sponsoring it, or you're the project manager running the job. But long after you all leave, this group of people that has committed to this are going to be the ones stewarding it. And so to have them engaged and involved and understanding the process is incredibly helpful for the long-term stewardship of the built environment. So this is a typical cover sheet. You know, it just has some general notes and utilities. And a lot of times, you know, you'll see something like this. This is the index here, right? So it says, okay, you've got a cover sheet, and then you've got your site plan, and the architects have done their plan. You've got the survey, grading, drainage, the utility plan, and then some details. And those details are, you know, they are usually written in this civil set, and then there are further details if you have to do a stormwater prevention plan. And we'll get into that a little bit later. But in this instance, you know, oftentimes these notes, I think we mentioned this before in a lot of sets of plans that you'll get. Who's ever putting the plans together, they will pick up a set of general notes because they work in San Juan County or they work in the state of Washington, and they just insert them into yours. So the reason you read all of these is to make sure that they're pertinent to your area. And then in places, well, like Lopez, we've only got in our urban growth area, we only have secondary treatment. So all septic tanks need to go on the site. So in this instance, you know, it'd be different in Lopez Village than it would in Friday Harbor or East Sound, because you've got primary treatment as well as secondary. But you need to read through all of these and understand what they're saying. And then this part about inspections, I think we've mentioned this and tried to, you know, not overemphasize, but emphasize. Always when you're planning a project, really plan in for when you need the inspections, because if you don't, you could find yourself stopped on a project when there's really no need to be. So just be aware of that when you have to do that. And then, stormwater it's very big deal now. Probably those of you who have been doing this for, 30 years, 40 years in San Juan County know that 30, 40 years ago, basically you didn't do anything with stormwater. You had a muddy little site and everybody just drove in and out, and, all that silt and clay was just being taken out into the roads and then taken down to the near shore and creating more silt there. And now that we know more about the relationship between the built environment and the near shore population and what's happening and the importance of all the eel grasses and the keeping that silt free to the degree that we can, we have really got a lot more emphasis on stormwater. So when you take on a project, make sure you can embrace that and understand it. And again, if you can get your CESO, which is your certified erosion control, if you can get that certificate, you'll be really ahead of the game because you get a big picture view of it, as well as all they're called BMPs, best management practices. And once you know those, you can learn a lot more and again, substitute maybe what is written in your civil plan. You can have a intelligent discussion with your civil engineer about what is appropriate in the islands for stormwater controls, as opposed to, say, an urban environment. And that can really save your project quite a lot if you take the time to do that. We're looking now at the site plan. So this, just says, so as Pete was saying, oftentimes what you'll see is that there's a larger piece of property. We put in some of the initial infrastructure. In this instance, you can see here, there's a couple of apartments and an office. At one point, that was the only building that was here. And then we had to build a Class A water system. We had to put in our stormwater detention pond. And we started bringing in our driveway parking area, right, to get in here. And then once we did that, we started building small communities within a larger plan. And on this one, you can see we are extending driveway, and we're going to add 3 more cottages here and parking. And again, this ties back into stormwater. There are rules that say, if the land has been planted in heels for 2 years before you start your next development, you can simply count this area, right? You can see this outline right here as your area of development. And if it's less than a 1/4 acre and it doesn't have more than 5,000 square feet of impervious surface, you will find yourself with much fewer and much less expensive stormwater controls than if you were to do this whole thing. And I would just bet if you were to try and develop all of this at once, your stormwater alone, I don't know, cost you a couple $100,000 easily. Whereas if you contain it into here, and remember, you're doing community development, you don't get any special dispensation for anything you're doing, but it does behoove you to pay attention to all of the requirements and learn them and plan your projects accordingly, because you won't often have enough money to meet all of the criteria if you do everything at once. But in this instance, we played around with it, with the size of the buildings, the amount of impervious driveway we were going to add, the number of parking spaces, and the clearing on there. We played around with all of it until we could know that we could keep it under 5,000 square feet. And again, that saved us a tremendous amount of development costs. And so I'm not saying that that is our only influencer, right? But it is one of many, and one that we chose to exercise. And then again, you can see that we've got our future, it's all laid out here, right? But we pretty much develop, within 2 years. And of course, if you're doing community development and community housing, there's a huge shortage. And so you might have multiple sites that you're working on and take them on this way, or you can do as some do, and they just say, forget it, we're going to raise all the extra money, we're doing everything at once. But just whatever your organization or your community group would like to do. I'm showing you this because it points out a little bit again, here, this right here is a water system. And you can see, well, we're only really going to here. We could, it says end of stage 1, and there's a blow off right there. And then we've got another one, a blow off here on the water system. And we have to do all this pipe in between, which we don't need right now. But the state of Washington on a Class A system requires that you have your entire water plan figured out. And yes, you can move it around just a little bit, but you basically, once you submit it to the state, you have to stick with it, okay? So you want to make sure that when you're looking at a site plan, you know what all of these mean, like this, I don't know if you can see this very well on your screen, but this is a septic tank, and it says 1.5, meaning it's 1,500 gallons, and then this is your pump station, the PS. And so again, you've probably are going to have to install this. And you can see right here it says 2-inch FM, which is a 2-inch force main. And it meets this 3-inch force main here. Now, you can't very well develop this area right here and have your septic stop, right? You've got to carry it all out to here, basically into this primary force main so it can travel all the way to the plant. And you have to think ahead of time, like this is a neighboring property, and all of the sewer district force mains come through our property. So we don't want to be in a situation where somebody comes in later and says, well, we have to get through your property, and they dig everything up. So you'll probably, as we did, the piping, as they say, is fairly cheap. You'll probably go ahead and put that in ahead of time, right? You just want to keep thinking about the whole, even though you are focused on one small piece, because eventually all this is going to come together and be built out, and you don't want to be redoing things, you don't want to be running into things, so you want to think it out to the degree possible. And one other thing on all of that, especially during these progressive developments, you want to make sure you get good as-built. It's really worth it to do that. And an as-built, so here we have, right, this is a site plan, and it's, you know, a local engineering firm has done it. But I know for a fact that when we came out of here, we moved this line up here. So when the surveyors come in at the end of your project, you know, and we move these houses just a little bit, we actually want that surveyor to go ahead and give us these corners, and we want them to redraw this line. And that is what you call the as-built, because it is the drawing as it was actually built, as opposed to as it was designed. And those as-builts become really important for any number of reasons. You know, a pipe breaks, or somebody wants to put in a fence, or you're adding on something. Any number of things can cause you to want to know where things are.
And a big part of as-built too is having a good record of photographs of open ditches, because it's amazing, a project like this, a ditch just gets stuffed full of, you know, pipe. You want to keep ditching as efficient as possible. So a lot of times, if you have a photographic record of what's in the ditch and what depth and everything, that kind of adds to your as-built collection. And it always does come up later that you're trying to find something. So it's crucial.
Yes, that's an excellent point, Pete. And you know, more and more when you work with contractors, they will tell you, nope, we do not want anything buried on top of another. We like wider ditches, and we like everything side by side, because when we have to go in, nobody wants to be on the bottom, right? Because you got to break through whatever's on the top. And so you just have to get used to doing that. You need to shade everything. Go ahead and, you know, like belts and suspenders, right? You put your tape in six inches under, but also put some wire in there. And so that somebody, you know, that's got the proper tool can come back and find where that, you know, voltage is going and locate that way. That way you've got two ways to do it, right? You can either do it through your magnetic tape that's there fairly close. And if you've got a, you know, anybody around that's got a metal detector, you can use that. But the wire is also good to use that. Do not let people put your metal tape down at the bottom. It doesn't do anybody any good, right? They've got to shade it, then they can use the native soils, and then 6 to 8 inches from the top, you know, they need to lay down their tape and their wire, and then do some covering again on it. You'll notice things like this on a civil plan, and you can probably guess what that is because we talked about it down here, but some kind of a dispersion trench. And that's one thing you'll notice more about stormwater now, is you really want to avoid concentrating, especially fast moving water in small ditches, culverts, etc. It's they prefer dispersion trenches, you know, that are gravel trenches, or a level spreader, which is actually, you know, a concrete that's got that's formed with these little V's in it to let the water wash over it naturally. You want, because we're disturbing so much ground, you want everything you do to mimic the way that water sheets across land before you got there, so that it has time to slow down, to percolate, and to not cause a lot of erosion. Yeah, I think we'll move on from that. Yeah, so now we're on the temporary erosion and sediment control. And when you pull out your plans, you'll see a lot of people here, they call for silt fencing. But if you begin to look, I don't care where you are on the mainland or locally. See, it says here, install 210 feet of silt fence or straw wattles per BMP. So you can, best management practices 233. Or if you have 25 feet of vegetation and it's provided downslope of the clearing, you can use that as a vegetated strip in lieu of silt fencing or wattles. Well, you know, this is something I learned in the class, because once you get used to looking at silt fencing, you'll see hardly anyone ever puts it in correctly. And it actually doesn't, it doesn't hold back any silt. Now, I know some people are real good at it, but for the most part, they are not. Somebody tells them what to do and they go out there and they stake it in. And when you see heavy rains come, you just see, hey, it's just washing right under that fence. But if you, and again, Pete mentioned this in the beginning, you know, you leave some spaces in your development that are just green and open. And if you look at all the best management practices in the Cecil book, you can begin to find where they say they have these allowances, right? So this actually works quite well. You keep this as grassy, and you know, you're disturbing all of this, right? You can see this is the area that's going to be disturbed because it's looking like this. And you keep this grassy area right here and just allow all of this water to be dispersed and then sheet flow over this. And then we've got a couple of rain gardens here. The elevations are, you know, this is 80 right here. This is 81, 82. So you can see that it's going, you know, it's flowing down. And we've also put in a ditch here and a ditch here to help it get into the rain garden. But again, you know, before you do a lot, because it's a lot to set up for all of this erosion control, before you do a lot of it, talk with your engineer and look at your site and find ways that you can, you know, mitigate stormwater without having to spend a lot of extra time, money, etc. And here you'll notice it says recommending construction sequence. Always read through this. It's actually, you know, it's a nice reminder, and you can check your schedule ahead of time to make sure that you've, you know, that you've got everything lined up to follow this, and you won't be backtracking. Yeah, you just, it'll save you both time, money, and effort.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Sandy,
Yes.
yeah, I was just going to say, I kind of appreciate that note that John put in there about using either silt fencing or straw wattles. That I've never really liked the you know, the plastic geotextile silt fencing, because it's just, in the end, it's just a lot of garbage. Whereas the straw wattles, you know, they just kind of compost into the ground. If you can pull off that mesh, you know, kind of later, it's just much less impact.
Exactly.
And I found that it's actually more effective than the silt fencing. You know, like you say, if the silt fencing is put in correctly and kind of buried in, it's kind of a big impact. Whereas the straw wattles just, like I said, kind of compost in. So
yeah, and you always on a construction site have room for that. These are just details that you'll see. You know, you'll see here this typical utility trench sections, and watch what they do here, because sometimes the utilities have a lot to say about where they want their utility and what they will allow you to do. So when you're looking at your details on the civil, have a conversation with, your sewer district, water district, et cetera, and just talk with them about that. It's just a good practice to get used to. And then again here, underground utility marking system. I think they put those notes in there to remind us all that we're probably going to have to find these things again, and just remember. I want to get out of this for a moment, stop the share, and ask y'all if you've got any questions at this point, because what we are going to do next is go over just what it's like when you are introduced to, say, having to fill out what your impervious surface is going to be and what your stormwater plan is going to look like. But before we do, I wanted to see if anybody's got any questions, and you can either unmute yourself or you can just put it in the chat.
Hi, this is Tim. I have a question. What are the agencies that you have to go through to sort of verify that this kind of environmental impact or plan for this kind of environmental impact, particularly with stormwater? Are you involving, like, is it basically local all the way up to state level, or is there just one office in the county that handles this?
They have, so, I mean, when you're doing the planning, right, you go through Department of Community Development and they look at it for land use, and then it goes into the building department, and the building department and the Public Works Department are looking, they're both looking at what you've got for stormwater, right? And I wanted to show you, and I'll do that in a minute. So depending on the size of your project, it might just stop there. You might just say, hey, I filled this out. I know my impervious surface. I've gone through the CECL. You name yourself as your CECL, and you just put your plan down and you show it on your civil, and that might be that. But sometimes it's going to involve Department of Ecology out of Bellingham. And that just depends on how much earth you're disturbing and all of that. So yeah, just depends. Now, if you get into archaeology and all of that, you might involve the tribes, you might involve some, federal archaeology, can't remember what they're called, but sometimes you have to interact with them. Go ahead, Pete.
Oh, I was just going to say, most probably Department of Ecology is going to be involved, but I found they may or may not actually show up and inspect. Our last affordable housing project, they never actually showed up to inspect stormwater. So it was all, the local, in this case, it was Town of Friday Harbor Building Department, but yeah, they're probably going to want to be involved.
Yeah, now the building inspector, when they first come out, when you call for your first inspection, right? As soon as you get those foundations in, before they give you a pass, they are supposed to be checking all your stormwater, right? All of your controls, all your, sediment control and all of that. And what I have found with Department of Ecology is that they will come out if there is a complaint, because the building department does not take that on, right? They come out, they see what you're doing, talk to you about doing it. You better have it done before we get, back, etc. And, if the inspector doesn't know much, or if nobody complains, yeah, you probably won't hear much from anybody.
Yeah, and it would be quite different if we were doing big projects on the shoreline, but most of our affordable housing projects are not not at the shoreline. So that, shoreline residential projects trigger all kinds of every agency you can imagine. But
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Does that answer? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And again, I always leaving grassy areas or undisturbed areas and focusing your waters through dispersion trenches at the very, very get-go. I mean, I know a lot of people don't like to take that time, but it really doesn't take very much time for it. But if you pre-think that, you are really doing a lot to mitigate all that sand, silt, clay moving off of your site, especially if you get a rain event that you're not expecting. It can do just wonders to mitigate all of that. So I really encourage that to happen. Let's see, I just want to share again. Yeah, anyway, I just wanted to put this up, not that we're going to do much with it, but just to walk through it a little bit, because it's one of the things that you will be filling out. I mean, maybe you're a designer or something, but if you're doing a community project and you've gone ahead and gotten your Cecil, you might just be doing this for the owner, right? And you're just going to go through and fill all this out. If there's existing, proposed or replaced or new, and then, you total everything. And then they give you this little chart here, right? Are you under 2,000 square feet of impervious surface? And is your total land disturbance under 7,000 square feet? Okay, so they just give you some indicators of what's going on and what you've got to do. So that is one thing that you'll fill out. And I also encourage everybody, if you're doing, let's say you're hired by, a local community group to do this. One of the first things I encourage people to do is probably the same you would do as if you were hired to do just a single family residential. Make your appointment and make sure you do your pre-permit appointment with the building department. It's just really helpful. You can go over stormwater, you can go over setbacks, you can just go over just about anything you want to and get all your questions answered. And you would just be very pleasantly surprised what that's like to do that. Saves a lot. So you noticed on that when you were filling that out, this is a requirement too. The first one said, there's no requirements. So you just read through this, right? And you're just going to read through this whole thing. You're going to start to understand. And if you've taken the Cecil class, all of this will make sense. First thing you do when you get out on the site is you just mark your clearing limits. And you do that for a lot of reasons, right? You do that because one of the things you want to do is you want to save some land from being disturbed at all, because you're going to actually use that to take care of all that silt and let that water filter through. But also, you probably want to guide people where they're going to park on the site. So just mark it out, make everything super clear so that when people get there, they know exactly where to go. Because if you don't, they'll just go anywhere. And remember, as a project manager, it's on you. You're going to have to, because you've got to control all this sediment, all this flow, all this everything. If you start making a lot more impervious surface, you are going to end up having to spend a lot more time and energy repairing it. So just from the get-go, just go ahead and set that up. You want to say something, Pete?
Yeah, I can't stress that enough. Marking, just staking and marking things out is just kind of the basis of what we call low impact development. It's just part of good planning to really kind of mark out where excavating equipment is going to go and not go. You can make a huge mess and it can be total chaos unless, it's really planned, it's really marked well. It's really where planning is just crucial, so that that initial marking, staking, flagging, defining where site access is going to be, where equipment's going to go, where people are going to park, and is really important.
And you want to make sure you've got all of your spill kits. You can just buy those spill kits. They have everything you need in case somebody spills gas or oil, and mark them first thing. Get your whole site set up. When big equipment comes in, it's big and they need, they can roll over things. So it's your job to make sure they know exactly where to roll and where to stop.
That big equipment can be intimidating, because they act like they're in charge, but you can tell them exactly where to go and how to do it,
and most of them are very, very amenable to doing it. They appreciate having the site organized. It's no problem. Sometimes I'll invite them out before they actually come to do the job and say, this is how I'm setting it up. Once you come over, take a look in the next couple of days, tell me what you need, whatever, because, sometimes I just can't imagine how much space they will need to really be able to get around. And so it's good to have that. Again, the more you can do on any time you set up a site ahead of time before the money starts rolling, with big equipment or ditching or foundations or whatever you're doing, the better off you'll be. So just go ahead and reach out to people. It only takes 5-10 minutes. You text each other, get out there. They say, hey, could you do this or that or whatever, and get it done. But again, I think, this is evidence of San Juan County erosion control, right? The 12 elements of minimum requirement. They take this right from the State Department of Ecology. It is right there. It's accessible. You can see what all the elements are, and then you make your plan, 1 through 12, you write it out, and there you've got it. You're all set. You just have to follow it. I want to point out, if you clear and grade between October 1 and April 30, there's a really different set of regulations that accompany that than if you do it during the dry season. So from May 1 through September 30. And you need to plan that accordingly too. I think for most of the creatures, if you're in the woods or even in a grassy field, they like to do a lot of nesting early on in the spring. I always prefer to do any clearing, just at the end of summer, right before, after fire. You only have a little window, but I like to do it then because I think it's a lot less disturbance. And then you start your building in the spring. You've had a chance to see how the site is reacting to all that new clearing and all of that. And not that you can always do that, but that's just my preference, actually. Go back here. So we want to talk a little bit about affordable housing. Now, community-based projects, they can be anything, right? A community center, it can be an outdoor stage. Some of you on Orcas, you saw that beautiful stage that went in the park in the middle of East Sound, and the kinds of people that brought out. And that was a response to San Juan County Parks they were going to purchase, right, with a packet, some staging for that park. And the local people said, hey, give us a chance, to do something beautiful with wood and volunteers and all of that. And well, at any rate, there's an endless number of projects that you can get involved with. And I've always said that the more people that understand how to bring the built environment into play for community groups, the better off we'll be, because we just depend on it. And there's no reason for a nonprofit or any community-based group not to have the absolute best when it comes to project management or just in general, running a job. But I want to talk a little bit about affordable housing, even though there's lots of community based, there's, farmers market area, children's center, you name it, they've all needed help. But in affordable housing, it is typically in San Juan County a nonprofit that is the owner and that is making this proposal. And nonprofits need to be particularly good at being flexible, making relationships, really understanding both what a general contractor and a subcontractors, what they all need. They need to familiarize themselves with the best practices for self-help and volunteers. They need to look at meetings, the frequency, who is present, how are you spending people's time? How are you spending your time? Just because you're a nonprofit doesn't mean anyone should suffer from burnout and being overworked. You see that all the time with people, but I think it's really important that we over time learn how to manage our own time, and as a result, we help manage other people's time too, and learn how much we can ask from them. And money. You got to always know what's in your back pocket, because you are going to run into things that there's no way you can afford to do. There's just things that pop up sometimes, and you need to know if that happens to you, instead of losing the project or having it fall apart or having a crisis or like having it create a stress. Who are your people? Who has your back? And what do you have in your back pocket? What can you pull out? And know that ahead of time, because if you don't need it, that's fine. You don't have to call on it. But if you can plan for that and know that there are people that you can pull on, everybody on the job, whether they are volunteers or your subcontractors or whoever, they will just really, really appreciate that you've thought that through ahead of time and can, make the project go as smooth as possible, because there's nothing so demoralizing as getting involved in a really wonderful project and having it be extremely stressful or fail to some degree. So anyway, just keep all that in mind when you're doing it. At the Lopez Community Land Trust, we've learned over the years that it's best for us to be the owner, the owner's rep, the project manager, the general contractor, and run the self-help and volunteers, because it's just over the years, that's just what we've learned that works best for us. But it may be that you're serving as a project manager for a nonprofit that really hasn't done any development before. And so it's going to be on you to manage all those relationships. And as we said, in other meetings, that you have to manage expectations and people have to be realistic. And rather than coming to the edge of a crisis, you're always, as the project manager, you are looking for choke points in a project and then speaking with the owner, even if they don't understand, how a project works. You're speaking with them and telling them that there are some things you're going to need in order to make this happen. And just remember, partnership, partnership, partnership. That's really, really what you're doing this whole time. Now, I want to talk a little bit about when you're running a project like this. Yes, a lot of times people say, oh, I have to get bids on everything because I have to know exactly where every nickel is going to go. Okay. If you're the project manager and that's what they've said to you, you can consider that. Bids all the way. And then there are some that say, no, I just want some estimates. I've got a pretty good sense of, who the players are, and I think I know how we're going to go get through this. And then some people say, no, I just really want requests for qualifications. I want to get, for each sub or each task that I need, I just want requests for qualifications. I want to know who's out there. And then I'd like to choose the person. And then I just want to work on a time and materials. Or sometimes you'll do some combination of that. But you want to talk amongst yourselves when you're starting a project and decide which way you're going to go. What I have found over the years is that I like to do, well, sometimes I'll do a bid if it is really straightforward. And I know that the subs, I've got everything planned out. I know exactly what it is. There's not really any guesswork in it. And they can do that. So sometimes a bid works. But oftentimes in a project like ours, especially if we're using volunteers and we've got some self-help component, that can scare off some people. They don't want to be around it. So a lot of times I'll go with estimates or I'll go with time and materials. And one of the reasons that I like this request for qualifications is you get to know some of the local subs around here, and they are pretty much the hardest working people you've ever seen. Their work. That they're fair, and you really want to be able to work with them because you're managing maybe a big project with a lot of things going on, and you've got a budget, but something might go over budget here, and you need to draw a little bit away, and their project would be reduced. And so one of the reasons I like estimates and time and materials is that I can build these relationships with subs and say, look, I've seen your work. I know your work. You're honest and hardworking. And this is the overall plan we want, but we may have to reduce, but then again, we may be able to expand it. And would you, as a sub, be willing to work under those conditions? And again, you start to work that out. So the role of the subs in relation to the general contractor and owner is really, really important. And as project manager, it's up to you, I think, to know, when it is best to get absolutely, a very, very just a strict bid on something. And when you understand that estimates and time and materials can work better. And I do have to say, for a lot of subs, especially here on Lopez, where they are, you know, they do all the work, they do all their billing at night, they have to do their estimates on the weekend or on a Sunday morning, you know, they've got, or their bids. And once you start to know that about them, you realize, hey, you know, they're spending all this time creating these documents for a lot of different generals. And maybe they get, you know, 2 or 3 of the jobs, and they've spent, you know, maybe 30 hours doing 10, 15 of these. And so what happens is that they need to take care of themselves. And of course, they need to get paid for their time. And so, you know, maybe they're going to say, well, my hourly rate needs to be this because I have to start absorbing all this extra time that I'm putting into things. So again, just when you are planning a project, community-based project, get to know, you know, everybody and the budget and the project, and then, you know, make your best, just make your best decision. Well, a lot of this you learn, you know, just over time, and there's not really, oftentimes there's no right or wrong answer so much as you as a project manager are holding a whole, and you want to be able to, you know, be flexible, but also come in, you know, within a budget and on time. And yeah, I think, you know, oftentimes you just get that by doing project after project. Yeah.
So I was going to mention something about funding. You know, we, for affordable housing, we get our funding from a lot of different sources. You know, one of the biggest has been the Washington State Housing Trust Fund. And they have a lot of requirements. Like what, Sandy, I can't remember what it's called, the Evergreen Development Standard. Is that it? It's kind of a green building standard.
Yep.
That they require for anyone who they give money to. And it's really strict. It's you know, very extensive and requires a lot of paperwork monitoring. So that's one, you know, some you know, private grants might be specific to, well, like one of our grants on a project was just for solar hot water, you know, so very specific. So a lot of times the project is kind of defined to a certain extent on where the money's coming from.
Yeah, and you know, in terms of the Evergreen standard, you know, what I've learned with that is I like to just get somebody right at the beginning. I mean, I can fill all that out, but somebody like Balderston in Seattle, or somebody where that's pretty much all they do with their consulting firm, and make a relationship with somebody like that, and they come up, or you videotape every stage of your project, because, you know, you are filling out, say, what you do with stormwater, what you do with rainwater, what you do with irrigation, how you plant, how you do your foundation and your insulation, and have you insulated everything under the slab, or do you use you know, a crawl space, and then how you do all your air sealing inside, and what kind of wrap you're using, and what detail you're using in your window, and are you using caulking that has been rated without VOCs, and you've got to take pictures of all your light fixtures, and everything has to be water wise. And I mean, the list just goes on and on and on. And as a project manager, you know, you've got a lot going on.
It's a ton of work. Yeah.
It is a lot of work. So to have somebody where you say, look, there's these 200 details, and, you know, as a nonprofit, you don't always know, like, are you going to get all water-wise fixtures? Yes, you know that you're going to, because that's what's required, but you're going to wait and snoop around and see what kind of sale you can find, or whatever. So anyway, you want some help doing things like that. And I really, so people have asked me before, you know, like, well, how do you do all of that stuff? It's like, you have got to get some help. There's not enough time in a day to do it. And who wants to stress out over all of that? As a project manager, you have to know what needs to be done. But hey, there are people for whom that is their entire practice, is meeting the evergreen standards, preparing for net zero building, which everybody's going to have to be in 2030 anyway. And the more you make relationship with these people, and the more that you understand where to source all these materials and have them on hand, the easier your projects become, right? Because you're just all set. Again, you've got relationships. And if you're starting a new project and you don't have those relationships, call around, find out who's using who, and get yourself signed up, because the last thing you want to do is lose the nonprofit their funding just because you weren't able to do this, because sometimes it's worth, $15,000, $20,000 a house, and it means a lot. So again, that's where the relationship between the project manager and the owner, everything up front. And I'm so glad you brought that up, Pete. But they have to communicate that to you as a project manager, because it's not something you can just come in and do at the end. You have to have verification all the way through. And that's in photographs, it's in notations, it's verifications. You have to document how much goes into the waste stream, how much metal has been recycled, how much, glass, etc. And so you've got to have those records. And typically you're doing that on a weekly basis. So again, to set up all those systems in the beginning. Yeah.
Yeah, I also wanted to mention a big part of project management with affordable housing is managing volunteers. And, there are times when you're struggling with the budget, trying to get everything done. And to a certain extent, you can plan on getting some work done with volunteers, but you can't have unrealistic expectations of just how much volunteers can get done. And if you do try and stick too much on volunteers, you can, I think I've burned out a couple of volunteers on the evergreen standard alone, so
Yeah.
you have all different level of volunteers with the best intentions, and some have no skills, some have a lot of skills, but they all want to feel that their time is being well used. So it's really challenging to manage volunteers and make sure they don't get hurt, and they're happy about what they're doing. So
Yeah. And one of the nice things to do, is every morning, with volunteers, or anybody actually, I like to have shifts, exactly when they start and finish, so that everyone arrives at the same time. I don't really do too well with people just coming and going on a construction site. I think there's way too much happening to allow that. So we make requests of our volunteers. We're happy to have you show up at 1 o'clock or at 8 o'clock, but nowhere in between, and then just do a 4-hour shift. There was one project we did where they were all a group of older women. They were all probably in their 70s. And they said, look, we can't work full days, and we can't move our shoulders, we can't lift up very much. And so what they proposed to do is shingle all the houses pretty much, up to here. And there they just moved through the site, these 3 women doing cedar shingling on 7 houses. And they were all done, just exactly up to their chest height. And that's what they did on the project. And I think once you get used to volunteers and working with them, it makes the projects so much more fun and fabulous. And people always ask me, well, how much money does it save? And I typically say, don't count on it saving you any money, but do count on getting some things done that you would never be able to pay other people to do, right? You might be able to afford a higher quality material because these women are going to come by and do all your cedar shingles. Not that we use cedar shingles anymore, but we did at one point. But you can afford a different type of material if a volunteer is going to be able to put it on. And I just love projects that have volunteers, and some of the people that come, maybe they'll only come for 2 weeks and they'll say they want to do something, and they're real good with stairs, and you get everything prepped for them, and that's all they do. It's a give and take, right? Because they're super valuable to have. And sometimes people want to be helpful, but they don't really have any skill. But there's always something to do, like figuring out all the recycling, or making a recycle run, or picking rocks up out of the field, or just looking around and doing the cleanup. Sometimes that's all people do. They come at the end of every shift and they just clean and sweep everything after the day. And that is super helpful as well.
Yeah, and there are some organizations too, like AmeriCorps. We've used AmeriCorps groups. And Sandy, have you ever used Bike and Build, that group? Yeah, those guys are great. A bunch of kids on bikes who just ride bikes across the country and work on affordable housing projects for a week at a time. And that's really fun.
Yeah, it is a lot of fun. And I think the thing that makes it most fun, the end result is always really fun, but really what makes it the most fun is if you're organized and you've got it well managed, and you've got your site marked out well, and people know what they're doing. There's a ton of chaos, and people have emotions, and there's lots and lots that goes on in any kind of project. But basically, it feels really great to do it. Yeah.
Yep. And, one of the great things about our affordable housing projects and communities that we've done, and, pretty much all three groups, Opal, on Orcas, and San Juan and Lopez, is we tend to get creative. It's like really affordable housing could just be trailer parks, but we tend to, really try and come up with innovations and interesting communities. And, like our last project where we recycled houses from Victoria. Yeah, just anything to keep it interesting and creative.
Yeah, and that really attracts people too, I think. People like to give you a couple of days, or some people will come once a week and help you out. They just makes it good. But listen, I want to make sure that you all have time to ask any questions, or if you've got any projects that you are about to embark on, and you want to say anything about that, this is the moment to do that. Unless you've got anything else, Pete.
No, I was curious, Sandy, just a quick, what are you working on now, or what's your next project?
Let's see. Well, we just purchased a 42-acre farm. So right now we are getting the infrastructure. So we're doing a wetland study, getting the water set up, stormwater driveway, some of the infrastructure, getting septic design. And then we also purchased a 5.5-acre parcel just outside the village. So we're doing the same thing there with stormwater, getting the wetland study, doing all of that. And we are looking at 3 additional properties. So I guess you could say right now we are engaged in a lot of feasibility studies on various properties and trying to raise money so that when we know where we're going to go, we've got the feasibility on the land figured out. And then we're also finishing up our last project that we did was 4 cottages. So we're finishing up all the fencing and landscaping on that and getting the rainwater system finally hooked up for irrigation. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. Yeah, it's good.
Yeah, so I think we can wrap up. If there's any questions or any comments, kind of last chance.
And you guys, I want to tell you, it's been wonderful to do this course. Pete, I've really appreciated, I've learned a lot from you. And this will be my last week because I'm not going to be here next week. So.
And next week is going to be our last class. We're going to cover residential management, residential construction management. So kind of a
Yes, I'm sorry, I'll
big
miss
final
that.
class.